Oh, you know, I saw there was a guest.
We'll call to order, I think I put one over on your, oh, okay. We'll call to order the special meeting of the Grand Parks Public School District, number 1, and we'll just roll right into the Smart Restart update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are on our school district's YouTube channel. Just so you know, we've pivoted from City Channel 2 to our YouTube, so people do have an opportunity to watch us live. They may have been waiting for a while, but nonetheless, we're live. So you have in front of you just one handout regarding our Smart Restart. We continue to meet on Thursdays with our Smart Restart Committee, and just so not only you, but the viewers at home recognize that public health is part of our restart conversations as we talk about all things COVID and getting ready for the start of the school year. You had passed a motion at our last meeting that masks would be recommended but not required, and that's how we're still living right now. We're certainly watching our local COVID data. The community is still in the green. I think we're at, I'm going to say, ballpark 125 days in the green. We're certainly aware that the transmission has moved into the orange, the transmission rate, and I think that's what's probably been more cause for alarm from people who are concerned that we are not requiring masks at this time. Maybe just a couple of things. As far as our quarantine, there have been a lot of questions about quarantining. So there's an incentive to wear a mask. That is, if people come into close contact with one another and the person who is identified as positive, but the other person has a mask on, the other person with the mask on does not have to quarantine. So that gives people reason to wear a mask. That's recommended by the school district. So I think that's important to know, because that's a clarification that we seem to be making on a regular basis. So you have a couple of pages behind you, or behind that cover memo, and what we did was we merged some documents that we're working on independent of each other and tried to merge this all into one-stop shop. So if you would just go to page 6, that is the place where we start with our health and safety guidelines. And I referenced a couple of pieces of the health and safety guidelines at our last meeting. And so if you go down to the bottom quarter of that page, there's a couple of bullets. Dashboard movement from low risk to moderate risk or high risk will result in additional layered mitigation measures. I think people want...
Sorry, Dr. Brenner.
Yes.
What page are you on? Because page 6...
oh, I see. There's two numbers. On the top it says page 6 of 13, and on the bottom it says page 4.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. No, my apologies for that. Basically, what we would do is using the chart that we used last year to make decisions at the campus level. We would use that same decision-making chart, i.e., percentage of COVID cases goes up at a certain number, a certain percent in a classroom. We'd start making decisions about that classroom. Same for a school, same for the entire school district. And what I shared with you last week was the game changer in all of this is the transmission rate, or the transmission level in our community. The transmission level in our community doesn't necessarily mean the transmission is happening in our schools. And we have no way of knowing that until all 7,400 students come back. All we have right now is how our summer school has gone, K through 8. And we've had 2 classroom situations where we've had 2 positive cases, and that's been what we've experienced since we started on August 2nd. There's no new information to update you or to provide for you at this time. So that's good news. where we've had some students, some adults masked, some not masked. So we continue to move forward with our summer school as is.
Dr. Brenner, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So when you started out, and this is, I just am asking for clarification purposes, because what was handed out to us conflicts with what you said, and so I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what the exception is, or the exemption. So the blue box here with the masked contact says if both the case and their close contacts were properly wearing a mask at all times, then the close contacts would not need to quarantine. And what you said was, if I'm wearing a mask and somebody is positive, then I, as the masked person, don't need to quarantine, which is different than what this says. So can you clarify, is it, if it's just, if you're a close contact and you're masked, but the person who's a positive case is unmasked, I still get exempted from the quarantine requirement?
Yes, this is the first time that I've seen this document. I think this came from Public Health, correct? Do you want, would you like to correct what I just said? Did I misspeak?
There's a microphone right up there.
Well, and I think also it might be helpful because, Sean, I'm inviting you to the microphone. You're happy to come to the microphone, but I just know that our public health folks have been part of our conversations each week.
There isn't. Can everybody hear me okay?
Why don't you use one of these mics?
One of those.
Mic as a computer. Thank you. It's probably easier for people to hear.
My name's Kate. I'm a nurse with public health. And to answer the question, if I am understanding what is on the document is correct, this is a document that was referenced for clarification with another board member, just brought it to support the information this evening, but though your statement was correct, if both individuals are masked, then the individual would be exempt from quarantining from that individual that was exposed to the positive case. So again, if the positive case and the potential close contact were both masked during that exposure and the interaction, then that close contact, as would normally be defined, is again exempt from that quarantine period.
So to make it very clear, so the hypothetical would be, as Dr. Brenner put it, I'm wearing a mask, the individual who's a positive case is not wearing a mask. I come in, quote, close contact with them, meaning 15 minutes or more, exposure within 6 feet. Am I still exempt, or am I required to quarantine at that point?
So from my understanding, can I reiterate that back, that the positive case is unmasked, and you are the individual that comes in contact with them, but you are masked. From my understanding of the guidance as it stands, you would still be considered a close contact.
And so that would mean that I'm subject to a 10-day quarantine in that circumstance because I'm a close contact.
Correct. From my understanding, again, I will admit I don't have day-to-day interaction with the contact tracing team, so I'm kind of sorry, reaching out to Sean if he has anything to contribute to that as well, but from my understanding, yes.
What would be the purpose of wearing a mask?
Yeah.
What would be the purpose of wearing the mask if we're not all wearing a mask?
That is essentially the basis, from my understanding, for the CDC recommendation for universal masking, in that my mask protects you, your mask protects me, and hence why public health is taking the stance that we do recommend to follow that CDC guidance of universal masking, regardless of vaccination status.
And I just want to clarify the information that I received earlier today, and it wasn't talking to anybody in public health, but it was, anyway, the conversation that I had was what I just said. If the person is masked, then that person is protecting him or herself but would not be quarantined, but should monitor symptoms for the next 3 to 5 days. That's the information I got, but not directly from public health. So I just wanted to clarify that because now there's confusion.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to what I asked at the last meeting, and this is really important because I want to remind everybody why we closed in November. It wasn't because we had high transmission in our buildings. That wasn't the issue. The issue was we had so many people in close contact quarantine, we literally could not staff, and we had to close down classrooms. So it didn't have to do with real transmission. It had to do with the ripple effect of coming into contact with one person. If that one person has 8 contacts before they're diagnosed, which is the R naught, well, no, that's not the R naught, but that's just it's one of the factors in R naught, right? And so if they come in contact with all those people, that's how you end up with teams shut down and buildings closed because we don't have people available, not because they're sick, but because they're on a quarantine. And then, I mean, that also plays into my point of, number one, as a community and as a board, our job is to keep our buildings open and keep kids in the classrooms, right? We can all agree, I think, as a community. And that when we have to shut down schools because of shortages of staff, because of quarantine requirements, that tends to impact the most vulnerable in our community, right? It's not the people with paid sick leave that can take time off to take care of, you know, a kid being home just because they're a close contact. It's our workforce, right? And so while I appreciate the divergent sentiment and I appreciate giving people an opportunity to make a decision, when one person's decision now impacts more than just the individual in the sense of not even exposure or anything, but just with the close contact quarantining, it's a very different incentive, right? We can't say that it incentivizes people to wear a mask if everybody has to wear a mask so we can exploit the exception to the rule, if you look at it like that. So to me, I look at this as whether you subscribe to mask working or not, it's an exception to a rule that is going to allow us to continue to operate, and it's going to keep as many students in the classroom. And so that's why I think it's really important, one, to understand what does public health require, and two, what is the school going to require? And so I asked the question last week, it sounds like we're still a little confused as to how this is going to be operating in our buildings, because that is the next set of questions that I have is, help me understand how this works from a closing and not letting students into the classroom if they meet a close contact. How does that work or still work?
Dr. Brenner, perhaps you could finish kind of going through your talking points that you were going to, and then we'll kind of come back to the specific quarantine guidelines and then further questions, but maybe if you wanted to finish going through the document.
So now I'm looking at page 5. If you're looking at the bottom part of your page, that'd be page 5, or at the top, it's page 7 of 13. So fairly close to the top, face coverings would be recommended indoors and aligned with public health recommendations surrounding regional transmission rates and risks and high risks, high risk levels. And there you see the action that you took at our last meeting. And then we also talked about masks being worn during transition periods and in common places. So as students enter the building, transitioning in the hallways, once they're seated in their classrooms, they're fine. But we thought this might be one more extra layer that we could do before students are seated in classrooms. Then in the middle of the page, just, you know, again, more from our plan last year, other health and safety mitigation strategies, all those things we talked about before. One thing that I'd like to highlight is rapid testing will be available at each school. Parent permission will be required, regardless of age. So anybody, student or staff who's symptomatic who would like to be tested, our school nurses will be ready to do that. And Lindsay Stotstead is working on making sure we have enough rapid testing kits at each of the buildings. Right below that, vaccination efforts will continue in conjunction with local public health providers. We've used our campuses for pop-up clinics, and that will continue. And then the final common sense one down at the bottom, students and staff should remain at home when they have signs. And then if we could go over to the next page. On the top, students and staff who test positive for COVID-19, confirm positive cases should be reported to HR, and confirmed positive student cases should be reported to the school's main office, and then we'll work with public health on the close contact piece and the contact tracing. And we are not in a tremendous position with a lot of extra staff to provide that contact tracing at the building level, so that's going to be a challenge for us, and we already know that going into the school year. So that will be continue to be under the guidance of public health, who still rely a lot on information coming from the building level. Building visitors will be allowed but limited. We're just trying to get through our open houses next week for our elementary students, in particular our kindergarten parents, many of them who have never been in our buildings before, and many of our returning kindergarten kids who are in first grade. Their parents haven't been in the building before, so we'd like to have that feel a little more normal than restricted. Any travel requests are going to be considered based upon the places where people are traveling to, whether that's athletic teams, co-curricular, or staff looking at professional development opportunities. Then when we get to the schools, you can see we break it down, and this is similar information to last year. Hand washing, hand sanitizer, physical distancing when possible. That's just a little more challenging this year with everybody coming back to the campus. We're certainly trying to work on the 3-foot bubble, but it's, in some cases, it will be difficult to manage. School events, assemblies, and gatherings are allowable depending on the community risk levels and transmission rates. Face coverings for guests and visitors will be determined by community risk levels and transmission rates. And then at the classroom level, again, face coverings or masks are recommended while indoors for staff and students and dependent on community risk levels and transmission rates. So right now as it stands, the board is saying masks recommended but not required unless you so desire to change that. Sharing of classroom tools and resources can resume because we know a little bit more about surface cleaning, and desk tables arranged to allow for cohort groups and physical distancing where possible. Most of our schools have resumed having all their furniture returned, everything that was moved out last year, to be in more traditional rows for that spacing piece. But all that furniture is now back in classrooms. Extracurricular activities will continue to follow the same protocol that we had last year. We did provide flexibility for indoor athletics, i.e. girls volleyball, having coaches keep players in cohort groups, so contact tracing is a little more manageable. We just know what we learned last year was it's really difficult to compete at a high level with a face mask on. And then we'll continue to receive guidance from the North Dakota High School Activity Association. I don't know if you want me to keep reading, because everything else is relatively the same as last year as far as the point of contacts, the points of consideration. Principals are going to weigh in. They're going to let us know how they're doing with staffing needs, staffing shortages, how many kids are on quarantine, how many faculty might be on quarantine, et cetera. And we'll continue with our weekly meetings. We'd like for the community dashboard and public health dashboard to look at that from a 2-week purview rather than to make a decision if we go from green to yellow or yellow to orange. On that dashboard part, same would hold true with the transmission rates as well, instead of making really quick decisions. So that's what I have, but I certainly understand now we've got a little confusion on the close contact and quarantining that we need to button up and get straightened out.
Open it up for questions or comments from board members. Go ahead, Jackie.
It's been no secret, I think, to the board that I do contact tracing as a job, and so I've been able to keep up on things. And I think one of the things that I'm a little taken back, I guess I was taken back by how the vote went last meeting because of my knowledge. And I forget that people don't get exposed to the same information that I do all the time. And COVID has not changed. So the way the virus works has not changed. The recommendations overall from CDC have not changed for best practice. Any changes have been maybe a little bit more political or to encourage people to do one thing or another. But really the best practice has not changed around COVID. It is still best practice to get vaccinated. It's still best practice to have 6 feet apart. It's still best practice for both people to be wearing masks. Those are all things that have not changed. And so I'm very confused as to why not just our district, but other districts have really relaxed on that, because transmission is no different. And for me, the health of our students and our faculty is more important than even just who's going to be out of school. and so that's important to me. But certainly from a very practical perspective too, because I know we do deal with a number of stakeholders who do not believe it is as serious as maybe I do. We are going to have students disrupted if we do not mask. That's just plain and simple. From a contact tracer perspective, especially if we don't have the staffing at the school level, I am going to err with caution if I need to. If I'm uncertain on if people are properly masked in a room, I'm going to say then you're all close contacts if we're not certain, because that's the safest way for them and their families. And so, to me, that means that we're going to have a number of classrooms that are going to be shut down. I can tell you that you can have one person, and you know, I ran a case this last week where I had 15 close contacts. It was not a school situation. It was just a person going about their life. And that is because you are infectious 2 days before you even know you're sick, before you have a test done. So you can have a student that's been in school. If this is a high school student who's been in a number of classrooms and been around a number of people and they're not masked, that's a lot of people that are going to be shut down because they're close contacts if the contact tracing is being done correctly. So that's a huge, huge concern of mine. And so I hope that we're really listening to that. And if we're not going to be doing some of these other measures that are, I mean, I know we're going to do the best we can. I'm not saying we're not going to. But if we're still having, you know, the close footage and those kinds of things, I think the best thing we can do is provide masking all around. I also worry, as I've had time to kind of process between last meeting and this meeting, from a school board perspective, I think about teachers. Do they have permission to require masking then inside their classrooms? I think we're opening up a can of worms if we're not doing a universal something. Because we're going to have pockets where people are going to be saying, well, I want this in my classroom, well, I don't want it in my classroom. You know, where does that line get drawn? Are teachers now responsible for making sure, you know, I don't know, little Susie has her mask on because mom says, I want Susie to have her mask on all day, you know, and Susie's got peer pressure from her friends, so who's responsible for making Susie make sure her mask is being worn? You know, those are the kinds of things that I worry about. I think we're opening a whole can of worms by not having just something that's universal across the board, easy, that's going to provide enough of a layer of protection that we're not going to have kids pulled out all the time.
Other comments? Cynthia and then Shannon.
I agree with Jackie. On page 7 at the top, page 5 at the bottom, you know, when I see this, masks should be recommended in the classrooms, but should be worn during transition periods. When you're in transition, you're moving along and you're not necessarily stopping and having a longer conversation. My understanding is that the concern would be if I stood it, you know, if I'm next to, say, Bill in a classroom for 2.5 hours, which in classrooms we're not this long, right? It's a longer period of time. So I would argue that they would, so I'm leaning on mandatory masking. This is my opinion. I think that the mask contacts, just the quarantining alone, I also think it makes it simpler for teachers, for parents, if it's just required, quite frankly, aside from the health issue. The only other thing that I'm not a health specialist, but the Delta variant is a little different in that it's got a little bit more oomph, right? That's a layman's way. I am not a health professional. The public health people can correct me. But I think that the concern I have is with the Delta variant, it's more powerful, it affects kids more, so I'd rather err on the side of safety than to be the member of a school board who's allowed it to go and allowed our kids to get sick. I did have one question based on your initial opening. So I got an email, I think all of us did, stating that many elementary classrooms have been shut down this summer, and you're saying just 2. So how many so is it just 2 classrooms that have been shut down, and does that include early childhood?
Yes, 2 classrooms. I read that same email that you received. It was not multiple classrooms, so I did some digging, and it was confirmed that we just had the 2 classrooms thus far.
And if you look at at other states and what's happening in other states, we're seeing more and more students, more and more children getting affected by the Delta variant. That's why I'm leaning to requiring mandated masks, and I'm prepared to make that motion. Yeah, but I don't know that you want to have a motion yet, but I am prepared to make that motion.
I'm not hearing a formal motion, so we'll continue having some conversation. Go ahead, Shannon.
Yeah, so I mean, my first point was, I made it at the last meeting, and I'll make it again, because I think what I'm hearing is we are going to follow public health when it comes to close contact quarantining requirements. Is that right? Like, in our plan, we will follow the close contact quarantining requirements, meaning if you are a close contact, you are not allowed to come to school for that 10-day period.
Yeah, the difficulty with that is, I believe the wording is recommended to quarantine.
So I guess I'm asking,
Yep.
what are you as an administrator going to do? Are we going to allow students to come or not? Because these are the important things that like we have to know when we're making the decision, is as parents, one, and as a board.
Sure.
And I'm talking specifically about students, but it'd be helpful with the staff perspective too.
Yep. So we have a meeting tomorrow afternoon at 1:30 to talk with public health about this specific close contact and what it means for our school district. Because as you know, other school districts are opting out of doing the close contact tracing based on resources, based on the spread of the Delta variant. So we have a meeting coming up tomorrow at 1:30 to get all of those questions with answers ironed out. So that's what I wanted to add, to make sure that we are all on the same page with those questions and answers.
I mean, I appreciate, like, that's a fine answer. I mean, but we're a week from people being back in school. So are we really leaving this down to the eve of school starting?
Catherine?
Last year, though, because I believe the guidelines last year were the same, they were recommended. What our school district decided to do was to add a ditty at the bottom of that said that we are requiring you to stay home as a school district out of fear of spread. And so we partnered again with public health last year to add that extra dimension, and that's the piece that we need to wager whether or not there's an appetite for that, considering the difference between the recommendation and what we were requiring as a district.
So, I mean, I completely appreciate the need to marinate on that, but again, Like, it's the eve before school, and now we're going to have to face making a decision based upon that. I mean, I do want to point out, and I sent an email just to Dr. Brenner and Dr. Lunn and Amber this afternoon. I mean, when you look at what happened, and Fargo's a larger community, so I'll give them that, right? But when you look at Fargo on August 2nd, being at the moderate level of transmission, jumping through substantial, it's 7 days later, and now they're at high, less than 12 days later. So, I mean, they went very quickly, jumped 2 levels in less than 2 weeks of transmission. So, I mean, by next Monday, we could be in a very different picture, just like last Monday, you know, Dr. Brenner explained, and it kind of, I mean, it made sense, right? We want a little bit of time, but what we do know about Delta is the rise is really fast, so it comes quick. It's not going to take the same period of time as other variants. That's great from a decline curve because it seems to drop off very quickly too. But I mean, I know it takes time to make these decisions, but think about what we're doing to parents and the students the eve before school starting. We're going to be talking about whether we're still on board. And to me, that almost pushes me more in the camp of like, let's just start with masks on. You know, if it's an exception to having to quarantine folks, and that's what we believe it to be now, because that's what we did last year, I don't know why we just don't start with that. And if it's decided next week that, hey, it's really only one person wearing the mask, and that's incentive enough for people to put a mask on, right, to at least be able to get out of the 10 days, great, then maybe we can go back to recommending it. But it seems like, I just don't feel like I'm doing my community of service, like as a parent, to say, we're gonna figure this out next, tomorrow, we'll bring it back to the board on Monday, and, because I will absolutely make the motion next week, if it's mask to mask required to get out of the quarantine, I'm gonna exploit the heck out of that exception to the rule, to the advantage of the school district, because I wanna keep buildings open. So that's just the camp I'm in, because it's just very pragmatic, not emotional at all. The rule is this: you get out of the rule by either vaccine, which more than half of our population can't do, or you put masks on. So it seems to serve us as a benefit, just from an administrative board level. I don't know why we wouldn't.
Jackie, then Cynthia, and then Bill.
I think it's important to provide a little history on the mask-to-mask close contact designation. That's not a CDC recommendation. CDC has always said everyone should wear masks. The mask-to-mask exemption came from the state as a way to encourage people to wear masks and to keep schools open. And so that's not even like a health recommendation. That was like more of a political, let's get people to wear their mask recommendation just for North Dakota. And so we're still following that as a way to encourage masking, but it's not something that has ever been like a CDC recommendation in that kind of sense. So I think it's important to remember that's the reason that we even went to that. When we started COVID, I mean, that was different, right? So are we as a board allowed to, I don't know, I have an issue if we're going to move away from any contact tracing or following contact tracing recommendations. Personally, I have an issue with that as a board member. So are we able to create, I mean, we're the board, can we create policy that says we're going to do contact tracing and follow recommendations per public health recommendations? If we can, I think we should consider that, because I'm not sure what the recommendations are doing us any good if we're going to go ahead and make our own decisions on that. I really was proud of our district on round one because we did follow recommendations, because we stuck in with the contact tracing and the recommendations longer than many other places did around the state, and we fared better in terms of outbreaks compared to other districts as a result of that. And so if we have a choice in that, I would really encourage us to consider at your baseline, let's just follow contact tracing and recommendations by public health.
Cynthia, then Bill.
I had a question about the meeting tonight. Is it for discussion, or is it possible to make motions and, yes, is it possible to make motions and?
Yes.
And then I also just wondered if we had public comments at all. Does anybody, do you know if we have?
I'm not allowing public comments at a special meeting.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Bill?
Yeah. My only question is, and maybe it's to public health, is if we start the school year with masks on, what is the magic level that masks can be taken off? What is public health okay with? At what level? I guess, so people, you know, I mean, last year I know you're all looking at each other wondering why I asked that, but I mean, last year we got into the green level or whatever we got into, and then we backed away from things. What is that level now?
But I don't think that's a fair question. So I think what you're asking for is a magic threshold, when the reality is the whole point to masking is, I think, at least from where I'm standing, right? So you have two exceptions to getting out of quarantining, right? Universal masking, so long as COVID-19 poses a threat, and the ways that you reduce the threat or the risk of contracting COVID is you vaccinate, you reach herd immunity, which is one way that you can start to be more confident you're not going to come in contact with people who are exhibiting signs, symptoms, or otherwise, you know, sharing the spread. So that's one way. And we don't have the opportunity to universally vaccinate at this point because 12 and under are not allowed to. It's not been approved. So I think if there is a fair answer, you get much closer to not having to keep distance and wear a mask when you hit that herd immunity standpoint. And that's what was at least preached from CDC throughout the course of this is, if we can roll out vaccines and we can hit the 60% herd immunity vaccination rate, your chances of having these outbreaks become far less because you're coming into contact with less people who could potentially expose you to the virus. So that's probably a partial answer. I think the point is, though, so long as there's a close contact quarantine, in my mind, and there's an exception for wearing masks or being vaccinated, and our 12 and unders can't get vaccinated, so their only exception is to wear masks, why wouldn't we? I mean,
I think it's a fair question to say, when do we revisit this? Would we revisit and take a pause at, you know, half the year or at a quarter, or you know, I think it makes sense to revisit and say, where are we at? What is everything, what's happening right now? Is the risk low enough that we can take that chance or not?
Jeff?
I would agree.
I agree. Go ahead. Bill.
I would agree with you, but I guess my question is, we keep, the goalpost just seems to be moving on people all the time, and you know we're going to get that question. How long do we wear the mask? Is it all year? Is it forever? Till we graduate? You know, I mean, they want to know that, and I'm asking the experts, when would they be comfortable of that?
If the answer is we don't know, or, you know, just some guidance would be helpful, at least maybe what the CDC follows or whatever. If you have anything, Sean, that would be helpful. Yeah, that'd be great, thank you. And then Jeff will. That's fine, yep.
So, first, I can't really speak to, you know, exactly what transmission value or case numbers or things like that we would say, okay, fine, you know, now it's a transitioning to this, the strategy is transitioning. What I can't speak to is the reasons why CDC made the recommendations they did, where, say, vaccinated individuals no longer needed to wear a mask, and those types of things. And what CDC strategy was transitioning from early in the pandemic, we had a widely susceptible population, right? Everybody was susceptible, everyone was immunologically naive. They hadn't encountered this virus before, the ramifications were unknown, those types of things. So a universal community mitigation strategy was used to slow the spread of the virus. Then we progressed to a point where we have some interventions. So we have clinical treatment for people who are at high risk for severe illness. We have vaccinations to prevent severe outcomes and infection. And so when that occurred, CDC said, we're transitioning to a model that is more independent or personal responsibility. You have an opportunity to be vaccinated, and when you do so, you're protecting yourself, and those who choose not to should still practice because they're susceptible, potentially immunologically naive, still susceptible to the virus, so still mask. Because at this time we have high rates of disease transmission. So there's still a virus that's widely circulating, and people are likely to encounter it if they're not protected. And what we look at the schools, and things have changed. So I recognize that things changed, and people saw that, vaccinated people were recommended to wear masks again, and that's because the virus has changed. It has altered, it's more transmissible, and evidence had shown that breakthrough infections in vaccinated individuals could in fact expose others, when that was previously shown not to be the case. So that was the reason for that change. And when we look at schools, what we have in those under 12 years of age is a population that does not have the opportunity to protect themselves, and then you have a largely susceptible, potentially immunologically naive population where that disease could spread more effectively in those classroom settings. And so universal community proactive prevention measures are what they're recommending for those settings to prevent that. So I can't give you a number to go by, but I think what we're going to look at is opportunities for this population to be vaccinated and for there to be reduced or sustained reductions in transmission and in risk of exposure and infection. What that is, I really couldn't tell you, but that's how they got to where, or how we, in a nutshell, got to where we are and why we're looking at it the way we are.
The other question I would have is, are we speaking indoor only, not outdoor?
The guidance does delineate between outdoor and indoor, and that's because the greatest risk is indoor, in indoor settings without sufficient air turnover and things like that, where the risk outdoors is much less.
No, I agree with Bill too, that we have to have some kind of document that says when we go with certain steps, and we have to follow that. We just can't throw it away. We tasked certain people with coming up with a document, and they did 13 pages, and we just can't throw that away and say everybody's wearing masks because Jeff says so. We just can't do that. We have to. Go ahead.
That's exactly what we did last week, Jeff. They copied and pasted the language that the board voted on last week. The rest of it has been the same. So, I mean, we can say masks are required because of the following reasons. And that was up to board discretion, which is what Dr. Brenner just said to us at the beginning of this meeting, if we so choose.
But as Bill said, when are we going to say masks are no longer needed? When can we get away from them? It's just whenever we feel like it then?
No, well, I mean, if you can tell me when we're going to stop dealing with variants, then I can, or when we're going to stop dealing with breakthrough cases, or when are 12 and under going to be able to be eligible for vaccinations. I mean, that's just what I heard public health say.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you can tell me those things, I can write them down and say it's going to be this date, or we can put them in here and say, once people are given an opportunity to exempt themselves through something other than masks, to not have to have a close contact quarantine, I'm all aboard.
We're not going to follow the dashboard links anymore here?
No, that is what the dashboard links do.
Right.
Yeah, they're data
And right now
points.
it's suggested then.
Right now it's suggested, but how are we getting out of close contact quarantine, Jeff?
Well, and if you're worried about what happened last time, it was the staff that made us go online, right?
No, I'm also worried about my kid, and I'm worried
Yes.
about getting called and told my kid came in close contact with somebody, or my neighbor's kid, and now I'm having to rearrange my schedule for 10 days because of somebody else's decision.
So do we make masks or the vaccination mandatory for teachers?
I think if we're going to make masks mandatory, I'm not suggesting that we're going to require vaccinations at this point because we can't for 12 and under. And it's not my purview, I'm not in HR to say anything about requiring vaccinations of adults. But I think we do have the authority to say whether masks are required of our staff and our teachers and our students.
And that's fine too. I think we need to know when they're required and when they're not. We have to give some
I agree with
metric.
that. I agree with that.
I think there's a balance here of, we've been having some of these conversations at multiple meetings, and I think one thing that Jeff's maybe alluding to is that as a board, we ultimately have the authority to make these decisions, but we also don't want to hold the district's hand every single meeting, talking about the same topic over and over and over again. And so if the board has the authority to delegate certain decisions related to policy or how we do things, what are the parameters then of that decision or that, policy that we're putting in place? And so I think that it is important to say, okay, for example, this is the document that is currently being utilized for close quarantine or close contacts. We're going to mirror that as practice. So great, this is what we're going to use. We can just throw this into our Smart Restart plan. If masks are required at X point, then and the dashboard drops below that, do we wait 10 days and then we come out of that? I think that there's parameters that we can set that we're comfortable with. And so, depending on what people's thoughts are about, where we're at with masking recommendation required or not, there needs to be some sort of parameters. Is that sort of what you were getting at, Jeff?
Thank you for clarifying.
Yep.
Yes.
I guess a couple of things to clarify. So close contacts, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to do testing or close contact stuff. So if part of this discussion started with the concern about staff. I don't know what the level of staff that we have that are vaccinated today. I don't know that we're able to get that information. But to me, this is, if we do a mandatory mask, it's going to discourage vaccinations. I'm sorry, it will, because there's no benefit to it. They're going to have to wear masks no matter what. So I am a little concerned about that. I think not having masks is more of an encouragement, but I understand there are other concerns. I guess one other question I would have is because I think we will find great resistance to this in the community, and there will be kids that will come to school without masks. What are we going to do when they go in that building with no mask? Are we sending them home? What are we going to do with them?
Well, that's a hypothetical, so if the board, chooses to go with a universal mask recommendation, we have to enforce that at the building level, and it will be uncomfortable. We're already worried about what's going to happen at the bus stop, because masks are required on buses that receive federal aid, so that's out of our purview, but we already anticipate, what our bus supervisors and our bus drivers of Dietrich are going to have to deal with when parents don't enforce or don't require or say, I don't have to. So I believe the same will hold true at the building level if, whether somebody is told they have to quarantine and they refuse to. We have procedural steps that we put in place. Some of them are pretty uncomfortable, but there are steps that we would take. So will they be allowed in the building, or will parents be called and have to come and get their kids? If the hypothetical is universal masking required?
Yes, assuming we do mask mandate.
They could not enter the building without a mask.
Okay, so we're going to have people there at the door to turn them away and contact parents so they know to come back and pick up their kid?
All of the above.
So I know this is just one example, but when I visited a school last spring, I was fortunate to get in the school. One of the things that the principal said to me was, do you see those 25 children? They all have masks on. They're not complaining. Children are fine with masks. I know, I don't know what, anecdotally, this was just one experience, but we are getting emails from both sides. Some teachers say, it's not a big deal. In fact, teachers have reached out to me saying, please require masking so that we don't have to deal with some kids mask and some kids not mask and that uncomfortableness. I mean, it is a little bit of it takes some courage, I'll just say, to wear a mask if 3/4 aren't or half aren't. So I have gotten that, and then I've gotten the other, which is, we'll do whatever you say. These are just anecdotal from teachers. And then I've gotten, as everybody else had, don't do this. You're an evil person for requiring masks. Not from teachers. But there are teachers who don't support masking. But the evidence that I saw, there were these 25 kids. They were lined up, getting ready, getting drinks in the hall. They took off their mask to get their drink. They put their mask back on, and nobody had a problem. You didn't have the kids complaining about that. That's what I saw.
So, yeah, I get both sides. I will say I did put out a survey after the last school board meeting. So our members make up about a little over 60% of the teachers, and about 42% had filled it out this morning when I looked at it. I can't access the internet, so I can't see if I have more now. And I did split it between adults and children, and 66% said they wanted it to stay recommended for adults, and about 60% wanted it to stay recommended for students, based on the members who filled it out this morning. Comments for why they wanted it to be recommended. Some were, our buildings are ridiculously hot and they're afraid of the temperatures next week. Some did say, you know, right now we're in the green. If we get to the orange or the red, we get it. We have to wear our masks for a little bit, and, you know, but I think a lot of them are like, that whole when does it end? Like, yeah, the kids will do whatever we ask, but some teachers had different experiences than other teachers with masking and learning and all of that. So, I mean, it isn't just, this year it is not just all gung-ho, yes, this is what we need to do. I've also had teachers, as Doug say to me, I got vaccinated so I wouldn't have to wear a mask at school anymore. So I've had several teachers say that to me as well. So just kind of that is some of the feedback. And then we also have the 30% that do want it to be mandated. And for many of the reasons that people have said. So that's just kind of where we're at now. More people may fill it out, but that's, I don't know how many people are already regularly checking their email and doing that, so.
I just have a question for public health. If someone could just explain very briefly the difference between the county dashboard and the like CDC, how one is kind of in the orange, one's still the green, if there could just be an explanation of that.
So the differences between the county dashboard and Michael Dulitz is the one who assembled that, is it takes into additional factors that the CDC doesn't. These are things like hospitalization, hospital capacity, vaccination rates in the community, and those things are weighted to give a final score and a grading, whereas the CDC dashboard specifically looks at two factors that are indirect measures of disease activity in a region. And so they're looking at the case rate and the percent positivity. So the case rate is the number of cases we have per 100,000, and then the percent positivity is a measure of how many tests we're getting that are performed that are coming back positive. And what that does is that gives us an idea of a couple things. One, if we have sufficient amounts of testing going on, and also an idea of how likely someone being tested is to be a case. And these are better, or these are just individual measures of disease activity, whereas the dashboard is more of a holistic measure of the risk that COVID is posing to the community as far as will hospitals be able to handle caseloads and respond to potential increasing hospitalizations, those types of things. So there's other factors involved in that dashboard that the CDC doesn't have.
It's getting late. I would certainly want to wrap this up by 10, so we'll maybe allow 15 minutes more for discussion, and then go from there. Go ahead. And Shannon.
To the vaccination point, CDC is recommending that indoors, even vaccinated individuals would wear their masks because they can still transmit it to other individuals. And so that should be, I would hope, beyond, individual reasons, a good reason for people to want to get vaccinated. If you're going to get vaccinated, it helps you because you can, you won't have to quarantine, right? So you get to stay at work. But then the reason for wearing the mask is so that you are hopefully protecting other people as well. And so I'm hoping that teachers can hear that and still want to get vaccinated. And it does benefit you because, if maybe you weren't wearing your mask with that student or something, maybe you still get to have that protection of not having to quarantine. I'm so sad that, I'm sad because I feel torn because I really want to give teachers what they want to, and I totally understand the frustration. I have a daughter who goes to a school here in town that's very hot, and she sees the work that I do, and she still is like, oh my gosh, I don't want to wear a mask. Like, it's going to be 1,000 degrees in there. I am going to die. And I understand that. And I think as a district, we're supposed to help people push through the uncomfortable moments. That's better for everybody. We do that when it comes to financial cuts, and we do it when it comes to, where we choose to put money versus another place. I mean, we make these decisions all the time for the betterment of the whole, and I think the betterment of the whole is to have a mask mandate. So I am officially going to make the motion to have universal masking, if that's okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, discussion? Shannon?
Yeah, so, I guess to Doug's point and Melissa's point, well, and I guess, so if an exception to having to quarantine is being vaccinated and you can show proof of vaccine, then I don't understand what the mask would do on top of it. If all the students are required to wear masks or 12 and over students can show proof of vaccine, and our teachers can show proof that they've been vaccinated, aren't they already within the exemption to close contact quarantine? To me, that solves that problem right there, as I read the blue. And I understand your argument that then they're, if they wear a mask and then they're not spreading it to others. I can understand that argument, but again, vaccinated individuals have made that decision to protect themselves through vaccination, and while there are breakthrough cases, those are very few in big clusters, right? So compared to unvaccinated. And I think part of the recommendation to not mask if you're vaccinated was a strategy to push people to get vaccinated, and I respect that too. My question from an employment standpoint, I think importantly, and I don't know, Lindsay, if you can respond to this, but there were COVID dollars covering COVID sick leave. Those dollars do not exist anymore. So if our teachers are out, are they using their paid sick leave time, I would imagine?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
and
that's the tricky part, and then our elementary school is not vaccinated, our kids are not vaccinated, and we have a number of teachers that have kids in elementary school, so you can see the...
So then we have them having to use their sick leave in order to address close contact quarantine situations. we then, on top of it, if they're having to take care of their kids, we're having to put substitutes into their rooms because they may be gone taking care of their kids, or they themselves are on close contact quarantine. So, I mean, you can kind of see the financial ripple effect of a decision like put a mask on everybody just so we can protect our budget and not blow it because we don't have COVID dollars going forward anymore. I mean, I'm just trying to put the pragmatic arguments on the table to say, like, I don't think this has to be a controversial whether we believe masks work or not, but if there's an exception, there's a way to exploit it. So I think there does need to be some direction, though, to Bill and Jeff's point on this not coming back to us on the eve of school starting or at any point whiplash. I think we can probably use 7 to 10 days, that quarantine metric of being within a certain level of transmissibility plus the dashboard. Like, I think it's very confusing to say we're in a green status when we're seeing transmission rates creep up and we're kind of back at where we were in our community back in April. So,
Can I amend my motion to say that it would only last until the semester break and then we would revisit it? Because that would give us a time frame as opposed to a metric, and then we would have enough metrics by then to determine whether we had stayed low long enough to warrant everybody changing their opinion however they vote tonight.
I'll ask Doug for clarification on,
Certainly, anybody can move an amendment at
on
this
their own
point in time.
motion?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a second for that amendment?
Then accept that as a second.
Well, it's a separate motion, so you're just seconding the amendment.
I'm seconding the,
Okay. Comments?
I guess I would speak against the amendment. I think that's too long of a time period to put it for. I was thinking of an amendment, but it would be much shorter than that, and it actually, arbitrary. There's no rationale to this date, just October 15th. That gives us about 2 months from today.
Yeah.
That we can see what happens with this whole Delta variant. And it also gives some more hope to people. And this board then has to look at it again at that point in time. But I just think a semester is too long of a period to go. And basically, we would, just be saying that, hey, we're just going to let it happen no matter what happens. I mean, I guess somebody could bring it back at the time. But I think giving just a set date, because most people aren't looking at the dashboard. They don't have any idea if we're in substantial, moderate, high, green, yellow, whatever. They don't know, so if we just tell them a date, I think that's going to be more accepting than anything else. But so I'm speaking against the amendment as is, and if that's defeated, I would move a separate amendment for October 15th.
My thought was rather than a timeline, that if the request is being made to mandate masks now in substantial transmission, that you would look at, okay, if we dipped back down to moderate and we're there 10 days, then that, and is that a better time? Knowing that our Smart Restart Committee is meeting regularly, do we have a dashboard thing? Or is it just a time frame? I don't know, just spitballing thoughts. Go ahead.
I kind of agree with Doug, and the caveat that I would probably put to his statement is unless brought to us by the task force prior to October 15th with a recommendation to take masks off, because again, in thinking on my earlier comment, I don't want to have a one metric determining factor, because as Dr. Lund pointed out and our regional epidemiologist pointed out, our local takes into far more nuanced factors within our community than the CDC dashboard does, and we should be following kind of locally what's happening, or we're going to see fatigue. So that would be the only nuance, is like I would encourage October 15th with the caveat unless brought to us before then by our COVID crew.
Right now, we have a motion and a second on an amendment. Is there any discussion?
on just the amendment.
Okay, Cindy, will you call the roll call vote, please?
Madam Chair, may I clarify?
Go ahead.
Mr. Douthit was supposed to be participating by phone.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if John can confirm if he is still on phone and if he's prepared to vote, or if I should mark him as absent, not voting.
I have a text message that came in 15 minutes ago that he would like to speak.
Oh, I didn't know he was going to participate.
Hello?
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Sorry, I didn't
Okay.
realize you were on.
No, I didn't realize, yeah, that's okay. I'll take the vote on the amendment, and then I can speak to the original motion.
Okay. Could you please call the roll, Cindy?
Carpenter,
We're voting on the amendment.
this is the amendment with Hassett and Shab to
Yeah.
One
September,
semester.
To revisit at the semester.
at the semester break, correct?
Yep.
So you call my name?
Carpenter,
No.
Douthit,
No.
Hassett,
Yes?
Manley,
No.
Mikula,
No.
Palmasino? Shab? Lunn is absent. Flynn?
No.
One yes, 7 no, 1 absent.
Go ahead, Chris. We're in discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I hope you can hear me. I would like to reflect on what Mr. Manley had stated, and I agree with that. As I said in the last meeting, I was asking, for a parent listening. And so I respect that. The other question, Dr. Brenner, is this. If we were to go to a full mask mandate, what would that do for activities, parents visiting, all the things that take place outside of the school day? What would that cause the district to do in the next few days with the activities and other events that take place in our schools?
Well, as long as things are indoors, we would follow the masking requirement that you're instituting during the school day. Outdoor activities, I would recommend those be exempt.
Okay, so Dr. Brenner, what I'm hearing, sir, is that if there's a volleyball match, the gym would be able to allow as many people as they typically would, say, 3 years ago, correct?
Yes, with masks, full capacity.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the other comment I would like to make, and I've shared this with various people that I've communicated with, I have put a lot of trust in Dr. Brenner's leadership with the senior administration, the conversations that they have had with local health, the data and information at the present time. Based on that, I certainly support what they've done thus far, and if we were to see a shift, I would certainly be prepared to make a shift to whatever would require at that time, but I'm very concerned about us, as we just voted no on, saying, well, we'll wait till this date. I just wouldn't be supportive of such activity. Thank you.
Doug?
So I would move an amendment to that the mask mandate would continue until October 15th unless another different recommendation is brought to us by the Smart Restart Committee before that.
Just a clarification, so the break for semester starts October 20th. So I don't know if that affects your arbitrary date or not, but...
October 20th, then. October 20th.
So can you state that motion again, just for the record?
So the amendment is that the mask mandate would continue until October 20th unless a different recommendation is brought to us by the Smart Restart Committee.
Indoors.
Indoors. I'm not changing that.
Yeah.
That was...
Yep. Is there a second? Do you want to state that?
Sorry, I'll second it.
Any discussion? Go ahead.
Okay. This is just my last thing, and I said it once, but I just want to say it again. When we're talking about, there's a lot of notion over the right to choose whether to wear a mask or not. And fundamentally, I made the case for how it could potentially shut down classrooms, teams, whatever. But think about one parent's decision not to put a mask on their kid and how that now affects another parent's decision to have their kid masked, right, in that situation. If we're going to impact that family's choice to try to keep their kid in school by allowing another family's choice, it's not an individual choice, it's interwoven. So, I mean, I think that's the other part I think about it is one family could be trying to do everything they can to keep their kid in the classrooms, and it doesn't matter because one other person's decision could completely wipe that out. So, I just put that out there.
Cynthia? Cynthia?
I was going to say that Melissa has something to say.
At least especially at the elementary level, lunch eliminates that right away. The kids can't be 6 feet apart at lunch, there's no room. So, I mean,
Can we get a
it depends.
clarification from,
I mean, it really depends on the school, but, I mean, I had 4 kids at a table, but we were told at one point, because they were eating in my classroom and it was such close quarters, that it didn't matter where they were, because they were all in the room unmasked for 25 minutes. So, I mean, you would need clarification on lunch and rules, because you can't have these kids eating 6 feet apart. There's just not enough.
can we get a clarification from district admin?
So,
I can speak to that. So we have already advised building administrators that they need to keep seating charts and to pod kids up and to just try to space in between the pods. I mean, and that's the same sort of thing that was in place, I believe, last year, because there were instances where students, when they demasked, they were deemed close contact. So we already have put those logistical expectations in place.
so just, I mean, even with the mask mandate, you're still going to have
Which was the
possibility
same
of
as last
lunch
year.
where your kid's still going to, just saying, so
Yeah.
it's not going to completely,
Yeah,
I
but
don't want people to think it's going to completely eliminate.
No, and I
you know.
appreciate that, but I think there's I fully suspect that there are going to be families that are going to request pods in families where they know they practice the same sorts of behaviors outside of the classroom. I'm sure that will end up happening, as it probably did last year. I don't know how the district manages those types of things, but that's what I'm suggesting, is there are going to be families that are going to go out of their way to try to keep health in the forefront, and, short of us not having a remote learning platform, they're making the choice to send their kid back to school. So, for what it's worth, I appreciate that there's no fail-safe here. I mean, there's absolutely no fail-safe, but it's one step, I guess, less of a ripple effect, if you will, if you have 25 kids wearing a mask in the classroom versus at lunch with 4, maybe, or 5. So,
I'm gonna, since we have two motions, or two, on the table, I'll call the roll for the amendment in a second. I'll just say my piece and then we'll move on. I think fundamentally, individuals have a right to a safe and consistent education. Shannon mentioned it after we've been here for about an hour, but the thing we haven't talked about is we don't have a distance learning option this year, due to how logistically and financially unavailable that would be. I think that's a major factor in this, that regardless of who feels what, if they wanted to take their kid out of a classroom setting, they wouldn't be able to do so in a distance learning option through Grand Forks Public Schools. I think it will be, to Chris's point, the right people sitting at the right table on our Smart Restart Committee and aligning with public health. There was a difference in interpretation of this document that was provided to us by public health this evening related to quarantine guidelines. And I imagine that some of those conversations from the district drove a recommendation because maybe there was just one piece of misinformation that looks to be clarified in terms of close contact. I think it will be highly disruptive to teaching and learning to change course multiple times. I think it's consistent to have a plan from the beginning and be proactive and wait 2 months to revisit it. Not only waiting 2 months, but I suspect that the Smart Restart Committee will be meeting multiple times during that time frame. I truly believe that our public health professionals are practically begging us to mandate masks. When they say that the CDC and public health is recommending that universal mask use in all indoor settings should be recommended, that's not just we think this should be okay. For me, I feel like public health and American Academy of Pediatrics, whoever, is practically begging us to be proactive when it comes to kids. The notion that this doesn't affect kids is false. We've seen it throughout our country. I don't want to be responsible for someone getting hurt because they're an uncommon statistic. And it may be a very unpopular viewpoint. The fact of the reality is that even though I'm vaccinated and may not want to wear a mask, my kid and other kids under 12 can't be vaccinated. It would be a logistical nightmare to try to pod individuals on our district staff to try to work with their teachers to say, okay, if you're vaccinated, can you handle my kid, because I want to be in a safer environment? That would be a logistical nightmare. It would also be a logistical nightmare to mandate masks for elementary and not middle school or staff or not. If we're going to go forward, I think we need to make something that is the same or not. We can't do a hodgepodge of both. We have mental health resources in place. We've used COVID dollars to make sure that we're staying on top of that. We have a year of what this looks like, and we have data and observational stuff in place where we can say this has worked, this hasn't. It's not going to be perfect. This is a win-win, in my opinion, that we keep kids in school. It's a lose-lose opinion based on popular opinion or not. So we're not going to make everyone happy. But the fact of the matter is that we have a duty and obligation to keep kids in school and keep them learning and keep their butts in the seats. And if the current quarantine guidelines necessitate that if you're not wearing a mask and there's a positive contact, that could have some ripple effects by also then not having a distance learning option. So those are my comments. If there's any more discussion, I'd entertain it for 5 minutes, but if not, I think we should call a roll call vote on the amendment with the October 20th deadline to revisit and look at a revote of the board at that time. Go ahead.
Just a question. Would administration need for us to make a motion for us to adhere to or require staff and students to adhere to public health recommendations? Or would that be something that would just be part of practice? Do you understand what I'm asking? So if someone's recommended to quarantine, would it be helpful to get a motion from the board that we would want you to require that at a district level?
Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I can respond. So it's always helpful to know that the school board backs that. I did review files from last year, and we received a legal opinion that we would deem COVID-19 what are the words, Brenda, I'm looking at you, a public health threat, and therefore we do have the wherewithal to be able to exclude kids from our campus if we have evidence that they are positive or a close contact. So that would really, and the same practice applied last year, is that those are the ones that we were able to verify through working in conjunction with public health, or because we were part of the identifying them as close contact process.
Okay, seeing no more discussion, I'll call roll call vote on the amendment of revisiting the decision at October 20th deadline.
Mr. Douthit, are you there?
Yes, I am.
And your vote is?
No.
Hassett?
Yes.
Manley?
No.
Mikula?
Yes.
Palmasino? Shab?
Yes.
Carpenter?
Yes.
Lunn is absent. Flynn?
Yes.
5 yes, 3 no, 1 absent.
So, go ahead, Doug.
I'm going to make another amendment.
Okay.
Sorry. Because I do disagree with you a little bit when the statement where you said that it all has to be the same, because I don't think it does. And this wasn't, I was going to make the amendment anyway, but you just highlighted it to me where I think it's appropriate, at least to try. I think you need to reward vaccinations, and I think you need to reward the kids who are eligible for vaccinations and have got it. And so I would move an amendment that the mask mandatory policy only apply up to and including grade 6. That grades 7 through 12 would not, the language would remain recommended but not required.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, discussion? Go ahead, Jackie.
Only 30% of eligible teenagers are vaccinated right now in Grand Forks. The last number I saw was only 30%. And also in addition to that, I think from an enforcement policy standpoint, I think it would be a nightmare for teachers. We're going to have teenagers saying, well, I'm vaccinated and you don't know and I don't have to show you any of my documentation, and we're going to have that happening. I just think it would be a nightmare as a teacher, and I think it would, I totally understand the idea behind it. I just don't think that we could enforce it at a level where it's not going to be really a lot to handle.
Go ahead, Doug.
I don't think enforcement's an issue because the mask mandate does not apply whether you're vaccinated or not on the 7 through 12 level. And it may encourage 7 through 12 to get vaccinated too.
Well, then my original point stands, and only 30% are vaccinated, then we have the majority unvaccinated. It's pretty much the same as if they weren't, in my opinion.
I think it would be difficult to enforce, I guess. You know, the public health guidelines say individuals who test positive, or both the case and the close contest, were properly wearing a mask. So if a vaccinated individual wasn't wearing the mask and happened to be a case, you know, then the other one would have to quarantine the unmasked person if it was a close contact. And, you know, I think with CDC recommendations, it's being recommended that you wear a mask even when you're vaccinated. Go ahead.
I honestly don't know the answer to this. I am assuming that minors cannot consent to administration of a vaccine without parental consent. So I don't know how much it, quote, encourages a kid to get vaccinated if their parents are staunchly opposed to it and won't sign off on it. I hate to cause that turmoil at home if that is a scenario. Maybe I'm making that up and that would never happen, but so that's where my mind went to, is I don't know that it actually encourages kids to get vaccinated if their parents are not supportive of that. So that's just kind of my 2 cents in it. And then the other thought I had was at middle school and high school, they rotate classrooms, right? Or there's team teaching, so there's a lot more points of contact, which then I think from kind of a contact tracing nightmare that becomes. Those are just the 2 drawbacks to creating that carve out.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
Could I ask public health, what is the Delta variant rate for teenagers? Maybe it's not separated, but is it higher amongst, say, 7th through 12th graders from elementary? Do you have any, is that a fair question? Infection rate, yes, please.
I couldn't speak to that off the top of my head,
Go ahead, Melissa.
Would staff be included in that recommended? You can have really mad elementary teachers if the elementary teachers have to mask. And I don't know that the students would care as much because, like you said, a lot of times the students will do whatever we tell them, but the elementary teachers will be mad if they have to mask and the other teachers do not have to mask.
This would require elementary staff to be masked.
We'll take a roll call vote.
Hassett,
On the amendment.
No.
Manley,
Yes?
Mikula,
No.
Palmesino, Shab, Carpenter,
Yes.
Douthit,
No.
Lund is absent, Flynn,
No.
2 yes, 6 no, 1 absent.
So the motion on the floor would be requiring mandatory masking of all individuals in Grand Forks Public Schools, and the board will revisit the decision on or before October 20th, also with the understanding that the district could come to the board at any time and pivot if necessary with support. Agreed?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Okay, I don't mean to interrupt, I'm willing to wait.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. What I want everyone to know is that I am not an anti-masker. I am, as I have stated numerous times, I have truly trusted the leadership of the district in their conversations. And I'm going to continue to do that. If they come to us and say, we need to mask, I tell you right now, I will be 100% in that corner. So I want people to know that I am not an anti-masker. I'm trying to follow the leadership and the guidance that's been provided to us as a board, and that's where I stand. I just want to make that clear.
Dr. Brenner, can I ask a clarifying question? Does the quarantine for close contacts make a difference for what the district might consider, knowing the information on this document now?
Well, I'd want to bring it back to our team for further conversations, rather than just give one opinion.
Okay, can you call the roll, Cindy, please?
Hassett,
Yes.
Manley,
No?
Mikula,
Yes.
Palmesino, Shab,
Yes.
Carpenter,
No.
Douthit,
No.
Lund is absent, Flynn,
Yes.
4 yes, 4 no, 1 absent.
Motion failed. Any more discussion? Go ahead, Shannon.
I hate to do this to the families of our district, but this needs to come back to us next week. I want an administrative assessment of the cost to the school district. If we have X number of classrooms shut down, what is the cost to the district financially? And you can assume elementary, middle school, or high school, whatever variability you think based upon what we saw last year. What led up to us shutting down in November? How many classrooms? How many teachers? What were we looking at? I'd like that report at the next meeting, because I think we have an obligation as the fiscally responsible board that we are in setting our policies to know what we're doing.
Other comments or discussion? Hearing none, we're adjourned.